investments and the sacrifices of my parents, because of the love and support of my siblings, of the prayers from our pastor and First Lady Rachel Knight. I still have my cards from my first year of undergrad that I got from Sister Mary Johnson. I still have some of the gifts that I received from Aunt Ada. I am who I am because folk like Aunt Nancy sent me care packages when I was hungry in school. I am who I am because of my godparents who sent me a little gas money, who paid the phone bill every now and then. I am who I am because of the village, and I am grateful for all of you. I'm grateful for the investments that you have made. And I'm grateful for another opportunity to stand before you. I'm grateful that you would welcome me back in the ways that you do, and that you would trust me to break the word for you. The subject is mask off. Mask off. The text is Genesis chapter 32, verses 24 to 28. Just blow the dust out of your book. Genesis chapter 32, verses 24 to 28. And it reads, "And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled with a man until the breaking of day. And when the man saw that he could not prevail against Jacob, he touched him on the thigh and broke his hip. And Jacob said, and the man said, 'Let me go, for the day has come.' And Jacob said, 'I will not let you go until you bless me.' I will not let you go until you bless me. And he said unto him, 'What is your name?' And he answered, 'Jacob.' And the man said, 'Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel. For you have fought with God and with man, and you have prevailed.'" Amen. Speak now, Lord, for your servants are listening. Amen. Now, while I was sitting over here on this first pew, Chris came over to me and asked if I was going to sing a song before I start preaching. And I suspect he asked that because he knows me. He knows who I am. And every now and then, I like to press my limits. But today, I'm going to stick within the confines of my gift. You're welcome. But I'm convinced, Grandma Wilson, that we can't really know a person until we know their history. We got to know who their people are, whose son are you? What is your relationship with your siblings? What does your history look like? These are the types of questions we have to ask when we want to know a person. Yes. I met a guy, Keisha.
No, you didn't.
Who was pressed to get my phone number and share some time and some space.
All right.
For about 4 months, he would text me and call me, and I would always keep it short. Friendly, but short. You're welcome, Keish. And the reason I did not give this brother a chance is because I thought that I knew him. I thought I knew him and had decided that I was not interested in sharing time and space. But one day I decided to give him a chance, and I let him take me out to dinner. Yes, I went on a date. And over dinner, he told me about his relationship with his dad as a child and how it changed in his adulthood. He said, "I love my godchildren. I have several nieces and nephews." And he told me about the relationship that he has with their parents. And he told me about his mama and how he treats his sisters. He told me about his grade school years and the time he spent in college. And I decided that he is not who I thought that he was now that I know his history. I had clearly misjudged him. And I'm convinced that sometimes we think we know these biblical characters well enough to decide who they are, but just in case we have misjudged.
That's right.
Well.
It's important for us to revisit their history. So lucky for us, I'm here, and Jacob has an easy history to track. He was born of Isaac, who is the son of Abraham, and Abraham was promised by God that he and his descendants would have the land that is flowing with milk and honey. He and his descendants would be prosperous, and on their quest to receive God's promise, they would also be protected from the enemies that they created as they roamed Israel, essentially colonizing. That God would keep them from any enemies that they might encounter on their imperial quest for capital. According to the good book, God had made a promise. Now, I've got some questions about how or why God would make those types of promises. But even if God promised Abraham that he and his family could have the land and resources that already belonged to someone else, I can't imagine that God meant for them to steal, colonize, create war, and conquer. But Abraham and his descendants pursued that promise at all costs, even at the expense of others. In fact, the identity of Abraham and his descendants was often found as the counterpoint to the otherness of their own siblings as well as the nations that they conquered. In order for God's promise to be passed on to Abraham's son Isaac, Ishmael, his other son, his firstborn son, had to be the other. Then here comes Isaac with his father's promise, and he had two sons, Jacob and Esau. This is Jacob's lineage, and the way that the story reads at face value and in black and white, we're supposed to love Jacob. We're supposed to glorify Jacob. His name literally means God wrestler. And the author of Genesis glorifies Jacob from the very beginning. But if we look a little closer and take the mask off, somebody say mask off.
Mask off.
We will see that even in the womb, Jacob is fighting with his brother. That's what the story says. He grabs on to the heel of his brother's foot in an attempt to pull him back into the womb so that he could be born first. Why does Jacob want to be born first? Because the law of the land is that the firstborn son is the one who inherits the father's promise. He was on a quest for capital. If we fast forward some years after he loses the fight in the womb, and Jacob, with the help of his mother, forces his brother to give up his birthright for some food.
Yeah.
Instead of just feeding him, he forces him to give up his birthright for some food. And then he tricks his father Isaac into giving him the blessing. This is the scandalous history of Jacob. This is the story of a man whose identity is steeped in the quest for capital, even at the expense of the other.
That's right.
Likewise, the church has adopted these capitalistic ideas of what it means to be God's people. Our success measures are dependent upon how many people come to church and how much money we're bringing in. We are on a quest for a monopoly as evidence that we are recipients of God's promise. Both Ishmael and Isaac were Abraham's sons, equally deserving of their father's inheritance. Both Jacob and Esau were Isaac's sons, equally deserving of Isaac's blessing. We are all God's children, equally deserving of God's promise. But Abraham sacrificed Ishmael for Isaac to have the promise. And Jacob sacrificed his brother Esau for the promise. And church, we are in trouble. We, like the descendants of Abraham, have laid our brothers and sisters down on the altar of the church to be sacrificed in a pursuit of privilege, prestige, and power. We have not stood with LGBTQIA folk. We have not stood for Black lives until it was trending. We have not stood with natives who still have no legal right to vote on the land that they inhabited first. We have not stood with our immigrant brothers and sisters who are fleeing the mess that America has had a hand in creating. We have not stood with our Palestinian brothers and sisters on the Gaza Strip. In fact, we glorify those who are raping and pillaging them when we glorify folk like Abraham and Jacob. The issues that matter have been sacrificed in pursuit of a pseudo-success. We are afraid to be too political in case folk decide they don't want to visit here anymore. afraid to openly affirm folk who are married to the same sex in case your biggest tither might leave.
Well.
It is past time to be real about the complexities of our human experiences and refocus our mission to one that is other regarding.
That's right.
The mission of the church must be to stand with the other as opposed to saving itself in pursuit of a promise that can only be received at the expense of the other. Y'all so quiet.
Well.
I know it was a bit tough. The story's a little hard to follow. Somebody's feelings are hurt. And I heard somebody say, how is this a youth message? I felt that in my spirit. And that's fine. Because we have to be honest about the place that we're in as a body, and we have to come face to face with the reality of our darkness.
That's right.
All right.
So I'm going to help us walk through it.
That's right.
All right.
Genesis 32 says that Jacob went alone in the dark to the top of the mountain. He needed to take a step back, do a little inside work. So he goes alone to the top of this mountain, and I suspect that Jacob could have come down from the mountain once night fell, but he was not in a hurry to leave. He decided to sit in his darkness. I believe that he had decided that I don't want to be who I have always been. I don't have to be like my mama or my daddy if my mama and my daddy weren't right. There's no such thing as a generational curse that cannot be broken if I'm willing to sit in the darkness of who I am.
Amen. That's right.
And not only does he come face to face with his own truth, but he decided to fight. He decided to wrestle with God. I believe that Jacob was fighting for his life. He was fighting for his humanity.
That's it.
He had come to the conclusion that the birthright wasn't worth living with the guilt of mishandled relationships.
Well.
That the material gains were not worth the sacrifice of his soul. That the iPhone that doesn't have enough storage in the first place isn't worth having if I can't call my brother.
Well.
Jacob had reached a place where he had to come face to face with the reality of his own darkness. And as he wrestled in the dark, the text says that the man broke his hip. And listen to this. With a broken hip, Jacob keeps fighting.
All right.
Now, if it hasn't already been made clear, I don't really care much for Jacob. But in this passage, Jacob teaches us an invaluable lesson.
Yeah.
There comes a time when we must grapple with the reality of who we are as a church and who we are as individuals. There comes a time when we must remove the mask, face the darkness, and wrestle with God even in our brokenness.
All right.
It is only when the mask comes off
Right.
that we can experience the divine encounter.
All right.
It is only when the mask comes off that we can meet with God.
Amen.
At some point, the mask must come off so that God can deal with who we are, our brokenness, our sorrows, the depression that we haven't told anybody about, the isolation and the loneliness. Sometimes the reason that we can't get along with anybody is not because we're just contrary or difficult. The reason that we delight in the sorrows of others, the reason we find joy in drama and can't seem to bounce back from decade-old traumas is because we have yet to remove the mask and allow God to enter into our brokenness.
Well. That's it.
Somebody say mask off. If we want to engage in effective ministries, we must be real about our brokenness. We must be real about who and what we are and how we came to be that church. How we came to be that person. You don't have to be who you have been for the last 10 years. Pretending that you're okay when really you're ready for a change. It's time to remove the mask.
That's right.
We must be willing to enter into vulnerability so that we can have an encounter with God. Jacob fought long and he fought hard and he said, I won't let go until you bless me.
Amen.
So not only did God show up with Jacob in his moment of darkness, But God engaged Jacob in a battle until daybreak. Somebody say daybreak.
Daybreak.
Thank God for the light of day. At daybreak, God gives Jacob the blessing he asked for and changes his name to Israel. Now, the name Israel means God prevails. I won't get into my issues with Jacob's name being changed to the land that he was occupying. But after all that Jacob had done to his brother, to his father, and I didn't even mention how he treated his uncle, because Jacob was really trifling. But after all that Jacob had done, after all that he had experienced in the darkness of that mountain, God prevails.
That's right.
Jacob goes to his brother, who he had run away from for fear that his brother might kill him for what he had done.
Yes.
He stayed away for decades, but after his encounter, he came back home. And his brother Esau greeted him with hugs and kisses. This is the brother who he stole from.
Yeah.
It is in the authenticity of who we are that reconciliation takes place.
That's right.
When we're honest about what we've done and where we've been and how we came to be who we are. It is in the authenticity of who we are that God is able to free us from the need to pretend, to liberate us from the need to take on the sins of our history.
Amen.
To emancipate us from the guilt of our past. God is able to lift the burdens of brokenness and of broken relationships and change our names if we can just make it to daybreak in the authenticity of who we are.
That's right.
Amen.
Praise God.
It was Jacob's authenticity that made space for an encounter with God, and it was the encounter with God that facilitated the change. In other words, there is no thing that God can't fix, change, or redirect if we are willing to remove the mask and face the encounter. God, I admit that I have fallen in line with the theological malpractice of considering myself a member of some chosen generation that allows other folk to be considered the outcast. I admit that I have allowed your people to be treated as the other. I admit that I haven't done enough to reverse what's been done. I admit that much of what I have done has been self-serving under the guise of serving you and others. I want to remove the mask.
Praise God. Glory to him. Glory.
Jacob stole his brother's birthright and created an identity based on otherness because he was in search of something he could hold on to. He was in search of a promise, a quest that ultimately landed him in the same place that he started, except this time he was walking with God.
Praise God. Glory to him. Praise him. Praise God.
I haven't been up here long, but I'm about done. I'm going to take us to this last point, and I'm going to sit down. Chapter 35. Chapter 35 is something like the end of Jacob's piece to this puzzle of promises. And in the very first verse, God tells Jacob, go and make an altar to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau.
That's right.
The God who appeared to you in the beginning. In other words, I was there all along. I was there when your eyes were low and red. I was there when you were staring at the bottom of an empty bottle. I was there when you messed up. I was there when you were messed over. I was there before you realized that you had work to do. I was with you when you finally decided to face yourself, and I'm not going anywhere.
Amen.
All right.
Praise God. Glory.
The beauty of our Creator is that she is always concerned with those that she created. We were created with and for a purpose. We have a divine calling. Young or old, there is a work that God has predestined and ordained for us to do. And God is willing to walk with us, fight with us, sit with us in our darkness. Whatever we have to do to become all that God has created us to be. God is with us. And God is waiting for you to take the mask off.